Welcome back to the last of our second mini-series on meditation and self-development. Last lesson we already spoke a little bit about the conditional and unconditional applications of the 4 bases of sympathy, or the emotional bank account, in building up the channels of communication with those around us which we need for our self-development. This lesson we come to talk more about the social groups which we apply these principles to help us solve many of the problems pervasive in the world today. Problems sometimes which threaten the very existence of the world itself, whether it be things like war, crime, corruption, vice, or even prostitution. However, these problems don't come from the world itself. The problems can all be traced back to the habits of the people inhabiting the world. And by habits, in fact, it's exactly the same thing which we are interested in from the point of view of self-development. Habits mean the things that we do, say or think until having become used to them. And these habits can be either good or bad. A person's habits are like the personal program which they have, which drive and influence them to do the same things again and again. If the things which they do are good things or positive things, wholesome things, then it will lead them to prosperity and eventually happiness in their lives. However, if they continually do bad or unwholesome things, then the things which happen to them will be more and more unfortunate, and they find themselves coming to a point where they've made a mess of their lives. So the effect of habits can be very influential indeed. It's not just a question of judgment in this case. It's not like someone is saying that it's good or bad, but some things are just plain stupid to do, like wearing a shoe of the wrong size will eventually hurt your feet if you try walking with it. This is not saying that the shoe is good or bad, but it's saying that it's a stupid thing to do, or it's an inadvisable thing to do because it is inadvisable in itself. So we're not making moral judgments here, but we're talking about the nature of what actually happens if you develop particular sorts of habits. But if we look at the problems of the world in terms of habits, in fact it's a very positive way of trying to come to some sort of solution for these problems. Because the thing about habits is that just as we were the ones who formed them in the first place, then we can also undo them as well. The nice thing about habits is that they are not our fate, they're not our destiny, but like a program in a computer, in fact we can rewrite the program if we wish to. We are not only the computer in such a case, but we can also be the programmer too. And if we can apply habits which are helping us to form a sense of responsibility for human dignity, for ourselves, for those around us, and for the economy of the country in which we live, then in fact these can be the sort of habits which lead us towards prosperity and progress in our self-development. So what sort of responsibilities do we actually mean, and how can we develop these forms of responsibility in our lives? Well, first of all, we need to have responsibility for our human dignity on a personal level. And this can mean that we don't allow ourselves to succumb to the sort of behaviors which would be more befitting of a savage. And we can do this by trying to abstain from 4 particular sorts of behavior, which are behaviors, if you like, of a savage, which are not killing, not stealing, not committing adultery, and not telling lies. Because if we succumb to any of these behaviors, then it will seem that we are taking advantage of the weaknesses of others, which is not really befitting of a noble human being at all. The second sort of responsibility which we're trying to build up is responsibility for the human dignity of other people as well. And the way which we can show our respect for the human dignity of others is not being prejudiced or biased when we're making decisions about them. This is particularly important when we are in positions of influence or where our decisions are influencing the lives of others. So how can we do that? Well, we have to make sure that our decisions are free of the influence of greed or hatred, ignorance, or even fear. Sometimes we see a person in fear as a person who needs sympathy, but in fact, from the point of view of decision making, if we allow fear to creep into our decisions, it can be a very destructive thing for the dignity of other people. There's always someone who is left at a disadvantage. There's nothing wrong with having a certain degree of comfort or convenience in our lives, but it depends how we get or obtain these things for ourselves. Because if comfort and convenience are things which we obtain for ourselves at the expense of the comfort and convenience of others, then that's hardly fair, it's hardly wholesome, and it doesn't do much for the richness of our own state of mind either. In such a case, it's said that we shouldn't be spending our own money or encouraging other people to spend their money on 6 particular forms of vice in our society. And by this we mean consuming alcohol or intoxicants, roaming the streets at unseemly hours, especially the sort of things which include nightclubs or prostitution, addiction to entertainment, gambling, bad company, and also laziness. You have a total of 14 things which show irresponsibility towards human dignity, as you can see from these 3 different categories of responsibility which we've been talking about. And if we want to overcome these shortcomings in our habits, the shortcomings in the irresponsibility of our habits, then we have to look at what sort of solutions we can bring to bear to overcome these. Well, there are short-term solutions, medium-term solutions, and long-term solutions for these sort of problems in our society. We can apply them to ourselves, or we can apply them on a more broad social basis. In the short term, sometimes there are behaviours in society which are simply not acceptable. Sometimes you don't even have enough time to explain the harm of certain behaviours. We have to get people to stop them first, and only later maybe can we give them the reasons for that. Therefore, in the short term, we need to have clear rules and regulations to stop people indulging in the 14 forms of irresponsible behaviour mentioned earlier. In the medium term, we may try to explain more about the harm of lacking responsibility in these 14 different senses. And in this sense, we have to have the patience and we have to have the inclination to go out and explain these things to others, to teach other people, to build up a right sense of understanding for them, and make sure that those forms of responsibility are becoming a habit in their own minds as well. We have to make sure, of course, that we have a right understanding for ourselves first, and we have responsible things in our own habits first before we can start to be a good example to others. But once we do gain these things for ourselves, we can start to reach out to other people with these good habits and train up the people around us to have these habits too. In the long term, we need to reach out to 6 particular groups around us in society, which are the 6 most influential groups in our own self-development. And by this we mean our own parents. It's the first group we're dealing with. The second group is our academic teachers. Third group is our husband or wife, if we have one. The fourth group is our own friends. The fifth group is our subordinates or employees. And the sixth group is our spiritual leaders or spiritual teachers. Sometimes in society we see that the nuclear family is the minimum unit of our society. But in fact, from the point of view of our self-development, we see that it's not so simple as that. There are many more people in society around us who affect the quality of our spiritual development. For example, the first and third groups we just mentioned represent the family institution. The second group we mentioned represents the educational institution. The fifth group represents our working environment. The fourth group represents our socializing in general. And the sixth group represents the spiritual establishment. So although we're just talking about 6 different social groups, but in fact we can see that there may be many thousands of people who affect our ability to have spiritual well-being in life. So this is why we need to reach out with our long-term strategy in order to influence the whole of society, especially through these 6 groups, to become better and stronger. Supposing we are talking about the parent-child relationship, then we have to make sure that we bring up our children not just to be strong and healthy in a physical way, but also to have a sense of responsibility in their lives, to be able to tell the difference between right and wrong from an early age. Sometimes parents neglect this. They think that simply sending their children to a good school or making sure that they're well clothed and fed is enough. But in fact, because children are made up of both body and mind, we need to care for their minds as well. Otherwise, they may just grow up into becoming healthy, strong ruffians. If we're talking about the husband-wife relationship, then again, we should think about it more as a partnership where you're living together, not just simply for sensual pleasures, but in fact to build upon the good habits both of you have. If you have the feeling in your own marriage that you have bad habits which you like to keep secret from your husband or wife, then it's as if the partnership is not really helping you to become a better person. Really, it should be more a partnership where you are sharing the virtues which you have between husband and wife, so that you can complement one another and you can improve both of you as a person, so that your spiritual development is enhanced by the fact that you are married. This would be a more sensible reason to become married than simply because of attraction by their appearance. And in the workplace, instead of it just being a place where we earn our wages, we can see it more as a place where we are training ourselves in the habits of responsibility and altruism, which are going to add to our ability for self-development. Sometimes in the workplace it's simply a question of one side taking advantage of another, where the unions are trying to take advantage of the employers and vice versa, so that they can get the most work done for the minimum of wages. But in fact, if we see the workplace more as a place where we are showing off our craftsmanship and we are developing ourselves in spiritual matters, then we can see that the whole issue of the workplace can be a much more fruitful place for working in a spiritual dimension. And last but not least, the first priority of our spiritual leaders is to accrue good habits for themselves first of all, and also to have the inclination to teach for the benefit of others. If spiritual leaders are not teaching for the benefit of others, sometimes it's as if they are neglecting their duties, because our society is very much lacking in spiritual wisdom, and this has to come from those who have more chance to study it. So the important conclusion which we get from this three-stage process of acquiring responsibility in our habits is that we shouldn't go finding fault with other people. We've got to look at ourselves first. We have to see whether we are responsible persons ourselves first before we start to find fault with others. We should try to develop ourselves as far as possible using spiritual teachings which we know. And if we examine ourselves in this way regularly, we'll see that we all still have a long way to go. Once we start to perfect ourselves more, then we will have more ability to reach out to others with the virtues which we have, so that we can encourage others around us to be interested in self-development too. If we can do this, especially in the 6 groups we have talked about, which are our 6 directions, then we will find that society does become a much stronger and more stable place, and a place which is a pleasure to grow up in, a pleasure to work in, and a pleasure to lead our lives in. All of these things, of course, affect the richness of the mind which we bring with us to our meditation. If we are those who are versed in enlightened living, then when we come to meditate, we will find that we are able to make progress without end. So during the coming week, why not try observing how you treat your 6 social groups in your nearest and dearest, and you'll find that if you are dealing with these in the proper way, then your own ability for responsibility will be enhanced a great deal. At the same time, if you find that you are being hindered in your meditation, then try checking out yourself to see if you are succumbing to any of the 14 forms of irresponsibility which we mentioned earlier. If you find you still have doubts about your own progress, or if you have doubts about some of the spiritual lifestyle which goes with meditation, then do feel free to get in contact with the Meditation for All program with any queries which you may have. I'm afraid that this is the last session of the present mini-series of meditation and self-development, but in fact we are looking forward to seeing you for a brand new series in the upcoming season. In the meantime, please keep up your meditation, and don't forget to study the culture of peace that goes with meditation, which I will warn you in advance is sometimes a lifelong task.